I was known as the Taj Mahal of Singapore, the most expensive mansion of that time.
Karikal Mahal was such a palatial, resplendent environment.
It was built for entertaining the good and the great of Singapore.
It's indisputably one of the grandest houses in Singapore at that time.
If my ancient walls could speak, what tales would they unfold?
There's something magical about Karikal Mahal itself. There's something about the place where every phase of its story is different and interesting, and it's not expected.
What secrets lie in shadowed depths?
They knew this castle was being built out in Katong, and so obviously a king lives in a castle, and so you call him the Cattle King.
The Malayan Magic Circle, they built a stage within the Karikal Mahal for their monthly performance.
The Japanese said that the men were first told to go to this place called Karikal Mahal.
What tragedies and sorrows within my pillars slept?
The death of Yusuf brought a lot of stress and disappointment to Kader Sultan, and he became a very depressed and broken man.
When the Japanese invaded Singapore, they took the Karikal Mahal and repurposed it as a temporary holding site for prisoners of war.
I was born a century ago. Within these walls, I have witnessed glorious triumphs, conspiracies, and shadows. Dazzling artistry, magic and mystery, murder, most foul, and tortures and tragedies, and the triumph of the human spirit. For the first time, I will unveil the stories that I have guarded in silence for so long. Today, cars in an endless stream drive past my outer walls. Thousands traipse by me without a second look or thought. I used to be 3 glorious mansions, but now I am only 2, separated, cut right through the heart by a road. Now innocent laughter and lively chatter light up and warm my insides. I am home to a preschool. Tiny feet scamper on historic tiles, climb stairs that echo footsteps of a checkered past. But how many of these people know my colorful and stormy past? That once I was a jewel more than 100 years ago, the palace of a king. The Cattle King of Singapore. And I was his love song to his wives, his children, and his successors. Let me take you back to the beginning. My master, Moona Kader Sultan, stepped foot in Singapore when he was 17. Poor and hungry. Singapore was still a British colony then.
Singapore has always been the epicenter of Southeast Asia as a kind of trading post. It really was at the center of things.
The opening of the Suez Canal again increased shipping routes. The Industrial Revolution with the advent of steamships and all, so you have more sea-going vessels passing through Singapore. So this attracted again traders and merchants to come here, and the Indians were also here. Again, they were present in Penang before and also early in Malacca. So coming here is something easy for them. India was part of the British colony, so travel between the colonies was very easy. Yeah, there was not much restriction at that time. And the Indians were involved very much in trade, in money changing, in supporting the port facilities. In the early days, most of the port workers were Tamil Muslims. And also the local tongkang were manned by the Tamils. They started this very much earlier in the 1800s, probably 1840s, 1850s, partly because they had the knowledge of shipbuilding then in Madras, back home, and also because the early traders were Indian Muslims. In 1840, I think the Oriental Bank in Singapore start issuing notes so they become like local currency. That will be used as a legal tender at that time. When they want to buy goods, they will have to use local currency. So that's where the money changing comes in. For the foreign ships, because the port is so international, so other currencies are also being traded by the money changers.
The Europeans, they had their own arrangements or whatever through trading houses. But if you were an Asian guy and wanted to start up a business, you went to a chettiar for funding. So right from the very beginning, there was this Indian community on 3 different levels.
Moona Kader Sultan was born in Karaikal, which is in Coromandel Coast, which is part of French India. And he first came to Singapore in 1879 when he was a teenager, and wound up working on the docks as a money changer. Money changing was a traditional profession of Tamil Muslims at the time, so it was the kind of profession that he could fall into fairly easily after he arrived here. And when he came here, there was already a large Tamil Muslim community in place that he would have found networks that he could join in order to kind of establish himself when he first got here.
The Indians were Singapore's first financiers. They adopted the concept of SOHOs, small office, home office, long before the term was invented. Their kitangi, office warehouse in Tamil, served as both bank and bunk. By day, these financiers would be hunched over their desks, armed with their ledgers. By night, they would push aside the furniture and roll out a mattress for resting.
And these were rough days for him. He said he would make only $3 a month. This is what he survived on.
As a young apprentice, my master began at the lowest rung imaginable. Even his most basic of needs were at the discretion of others. But thankfully, this community would give him the sustenance he needed.
The chettiars, whose presence in Southeast Asia go back hundreds of years, initially they were traders and they were coming here like everybody else. We're talking sort of 15th and 16th century, possibly even earlier. But somehow they seem to have carved out a niche for themselves as money lenders.
It's very typical for them to come and then learn the trade. Once they're familiar with the trade, they will start their own businesses in a similar industry.
My master was among hundreds of young boys whose destiny had been written for them. As children in their homeland, they learned rudimentary skills like counting, writing, and languages to prepare them for a life in foreign lands. Their mission? To become a respected and prosperous member of their community and together forge a new life for one and all.
But I suspect as the money changes, probably has to do the running around. He probably have to go down to the port to meet those people, to collect the money and to change, rather than sitting behind and waiting for people to come.
Of course, as a young one, he wanted so much to be his family's pride. But he knew he was destined for more.
came here and he was looking around and thinking, how can I raise myself up beyond the position that I'm in now? And again, just because there's networks in place doesn't mean that that rise is inevitable. You still have to work your way forward. He was certainly ambitious, I think you can say, because we can see what he wound up becoming as an adult.
Could this unworldly young man even envision the dazzling future ahead of him? That one day he would burn so bright.
US dollar, pound, US dollar.
The Singapore docks in the 1880s, when he would have started working on them, would have been a very bustling place, and there would have been a large international group that was moving through them. Coming from Karaikal, which was not, it's a smaller port than Singapore, but it's still an international port. He would have been exposed to European ideas. It was part of French India. I would take someone who was able to see opportunities and capitalize on them to make money out of that kind of a situation.
Pounds, US dollar.
We know for a fact that Moona Kader Sultan could speak a bit of French at least. He spoke English because he interacted with the British. He spoke Malay because most of his workers were either Malay. He spoke Tamil because that was where he was from, and his workers were also Tamil.
He was dazzled by the wealth of those he encountered. He was quick to learn the ways of the world. He observed and noted the interactions and the problems between various communities in Singapore. With his high emotional intelligence, a smattering of French and English, coupled with his ability to pick up local dialects quickly, he helped the wealthy colonials connect with the locals, making himself indispensable. He would emulate those whom he wanted to become. Their nose for opportunity became his too. As he worked in the money-lending trade, he was gaining more than just experience. He was building connections and sharpening his instincts, but he was never satisfied. An idea wandered across his mind, but he had still some work to do. He moved with relentless drive, building strong alliances. Before long, he was ready to become the captain of his own destiny. He ventured into his first business partnership in the meat industry. He had a captive market. His vision, to one day emerge the market leader and become a scion of the industry. That is perhaps when the idea of me was first conceived. As my master's ambition for his businesses grew, so did his family. The birth of young master Muhammad Yusuf was his greatest pride and joy. Yusuf would later help him with his expanding business empire. But first, he had to find that one opportunity that allowed him to dominate a certain market. That he found in cattle. Where others saw livestock, he saw a livelihood. Opportunity had hooved its way right in front of him.
The question of why he left the money-changing business is an open one. And I think you have to put that into a historical context, that this industry was largely due to the expanding colonial economy. The demand for cattle and the demand for dairy products is a direct result of the British expanding their economic base in Malaya at the time, right? I mean, this wouldn't have been a business opportunity 100 years before.
As the island nation grew, so too did its opportunities and the demands of its prosperous society. My master, in his wisdom and cunning, saw the potential of the meat industry.
All the meat that was eaten in Singapore was imported live. meat because it was eaten by the well-off. Obviously, there was a good amount of money to be made in the meat trade. The people who imported meat, they had the monopoly. There wasn't another source that you could. I mean, there wasn't much rearing of cattle or sheep or goats in Singapore.
They weren't eating cheese products and having steaks and things like this. It took British industry to create this as a commodity, which allowed people then to make money on it.
And making money was my master's forte. As a respected member of his own community, he had a captive market. He could use this to his advantage. His vision, to one day emerge as the king in cattle trading. In June 1914, he set the wheels in motion and bought over one of the largest cattle dealerships, the Straits Cattle Trading Company.
He joined Straits Cattle Trading Co. in 1909. Cattle trading were dominated also by the Tamil Muslims, partly because the non-Muslim Indians, the Hindus, they do not eat beef.
The cattle trade seems to be concentrated in the Little India area because off the Serangoon Road to the northwest side of it, it was kind of marshy land, grass grew well. I think people found it convenient to park their cattle there before they were slaughtered. So did Little India arise because the cattle were there, or did the cattle go there because the Indians were there? I think it's the other way around. Because the Indians were so connected with the cattle industry, it created this area which we know today as Little India.
Straits Cattle Trading was probably the biggest company because they were also being nicknamed as the big company when it comes to meat trading.
Using the same business acumen that he used to dominate the money-lending business, he started to conquer the cattle trading industry, and the money he made from finance came to be of great help in his new venture.
Initially, most of the cattle come from Australia, but then they diversify and they got it from Bangkok, Patani, from northeast coast of Malaysia, Terengganu, and also from Phnom Penh. I suppose it must have been that the meat market was quite large. And again, because there were no other players, so only a few companies. And these few companies must have also a network with shipping agents to be able to ship this. And Kader Sultan had the advantage where he has his own vessel, the Amra. At the time, there was cattle disease when the other cattle traders couldn't bring in because they were taking from the traditional sources and their network was only with certain vessels plying those routes. Kader Sultan had his own vessel and he was able to bring in those cattle.
His genius, if there's any kind of genius underlying this, was his ability to recognize that opportunity and then create a pathway for himself to dominate that trade completely.
I think his great business acumen. He can see what is lucrative and he really go all out into it. There was also an instant where he sought the service of a Chinese man, Ho Yang Ping, to try to get into the market in the Ellenborough market, the Telok Ayer market, and the Clyde Terrace market. He wanted to penetrate into this market. And Ho Yang Ping claims to be influential in this market and could get him a foothold in there by getting the butchers there to buy from him.
With his innate charm and social intelligence, he not only won over the colonial elite, but also bridged the world of Chinese business, forging connections that only a few could achieve.
Eventually, as the Straits Trading Company came to dominate the trade, then the press dubbed him the Cattle King.
It was as if my master possessed the Midas touch, from currency exchange to finance to the cattle trade. Everything he touched seemed to turn into gold. His astounding success and accumulated wealth led him to newfound status in the community. And yet, something seemed to be missing. After all, what is a king without a palace?
Tracing his property buying spree, I think he started off in 1899, where he bought a house in Chinatown. That went on 1907, 1908, 1913. He bought a lot of properties in Little India area, in Coronation Road area, Racecourse, Owen Road.
The big mansions that were built in Katong were largely built by, I guess for lack of a better phrase, native business people who had made a lot of money. And it was the place to go and do this, to be seen.
Yusuf?
It was not just an affluent neighborhood, it's a place to be ostentatious and to show off this kind of wealth that you have. Some of these were even second homes for some of these families. So it was a choice to be, I mean, if you want to think of it as a kind of Beverly Hills of the time or something like that.
Yusuf.
Yes, father.
Look.
He wouldn't rest on his laurels.
Spot.
He was a man on a mission to amass real estate gold. In particular, a swath of bespoke land on which I would stand. Together with his eldest son Yusuf, they scoured the East Coast.
Karaikal is next to the sea in India. His money is made by the sea. The cattle have to be brought into Singapore. In a way, it creates a mini Karaikal in Singapore where he could be the king, you see.
But alas, he wanted more. He deserved more. He deserved me. Some would say I cast a spell over him. The idea of me bewitched him. Build me, and the riches will come. Once a nobody, now a man who dares to become king.
In 1917, he bought a large piece of land in East Coast, around 35,000 square feet, which he eventually built Karikal Mahal there.
And it's built out there because that period of time in the 1920s, it's burgeoning as a suburb. People have been building out in Katong since the 19th century.
It was a nice place to be, the British, and they prospered. They were one of the kind of leaders of this burgeoning middle class, and supposedly the kind of aesthetic of the Peranakan aesthetic. They like colourful things, a lot of ornament and decoration, and it is true that if you go to let's say Chuchat Road and Chuchat Place, and the roads leading off Chuchat Road, and you look at the townhouses there, they're often very ornate. They have these majestic glazed tiles, which was very much part of the Peranakan aesthetic. So obviously for Moona Kader Sultan to move to the East Coast, he wasn't going there because he had friends there. He must have been a bit of an outlier, an outsider.
He would spare no expense on me. I would be his crown, a symbol of his stature and pinnacle of who he had become. And he would name me in homage to his motherland, from whence it all began, Karikal Mahal.
The building was completed sometime in 1920, 1922. He spent quite a hefty amount on that. It was claimed that he spent $500,000 to build the mansion. I reckon it will be about $20–30 million now.
Karikal Palace, in homage to his hometown. But I am actually made up of 3 grand mansions, inspired by Victorian, Italian, and Indian architecture, to satisfy the eclectic whims of my master.
Karikal Mahal was named after his hometown, Karikal Mahal as in palace, but there were jokes around that time as well that Mahal as in Malay means expensive. Only he knows what is true, but I suspect Karikal Palace was more appropriate at that time.
I used to have a watchtower, a kind of folly, a whimsical, eccentric structure. In the UK, often found in stately homes, it was all the rage in the 18th to 19th century.
The style of architecture is a bit rojak, really. It's sort of classical architecture, a bit mixed up, freestyle, what's sometimes called Straits eclectic. There are one interesting things is that on the top of the elevations, there's often a parapet wall, which is broken up every so often with a kind of urn, or which has a kind of Ottoman or Muslim kind of detailing to it.
Just outside of the wall to the north, facing East Coast Road, there was a big parcel he owned that he never developed. It was an empty field. It's still an empty field today, actually. So what he did with that space was there was a bandstand that he had erected there, and there would be musical performances. Sometimes very grand performances. You would have a circus that was passing through Singapore, and he would have them perform on that empty field, or theatrical troupes, wayang shows and things like this. And this is his way of giving back to the local community. It wasn't just rich people in Katong. There were kampongs around there as well, and these people could come and enjoy these kind of shows on his front doorstep, so to speak. But there was a wall, that wall still exists, by the way, that separated that empty field from his houses. So the compound itself was walled all the way around, including on the beach side. That part of that wall still exists too.
The private road leading to the Karikal Mahal was named Karikal Road. A few years later, another lane adjacent to the Karikal Mahal was named Karikal Lane.
In the middle of the luxurious garden was a fountain and fish pond. Surrounded by a circular pavilion, I was the most beautiful belle in all of Katong.
It's indisputably one of the grandest houses in Singapore at that time.
I felt the pride in him as he walked through my hallways. I was his glorious invention, cast in his image. But for one moment, it felt like it was not I that caught his gaze, but that of his own reflection. While the Taj Mahal was a dedication to true love, I was a tribute to no one but himself. It was an infectious kind of self-indulgence that would soon reverberate within my walls. But these would be glorious times, and I, the belle of the ball, the creme of society, tantalized by my dazzling beauty.
One of the reasons you need a big grand house if you want to be a social mover is so you can have great big parties in them. And that becomes part of the expression of your power and your prestige. It's a projection of those things that you have this kind of property to show off. And show off he did.
There would have been bands, huge catering. A lot of ice was probably brought in to keep the refreshments cool. There's music, and these were great extravaganzas. And these occasions, these festive occasions, were well reported in the newspapers.
And we can't underestimate the number of guests for these garden parties. Hundreds, if not thousands of people, literally.
It was built for entertaining. I mean, these are large grounds, and with different structures. There was a bandstand. So obviously, not first and foremost, but uppermost in his mind would have been to entertaining the good and the great of Singapore at that time, across the board, British, Chinese, Malay sultans, rich Muslim Tamils as well, and large numbers of people would have come to these parties.
They knew this castle was being built out in Katong, and so obviously a king lives in a castle, and so you call him the Cattle King.
His rise in business stature was commensurate with his rise in social, commercial, and even political prestige.
It is very common at that time for people in business to be community leaders, and they were much sought after to head organizations.
Living in a country which protects our persons, homes and houses and allows us privileges to practice our religion and customs as no other government would do. We should contribute, the richest thousands and the poorest mite, to make the centenary a great success. Thank you.
He was also patron of football clubs. He was president of the Malayan Football Association. He also has his own football club.
My master created his own league tournament, the Kader Sultan League. An avid football fan, he even joined his players. My master was not just an ambitious and savvy businessman. He also gave generously.
He gives a lot to charity. He gave to the Raffles College. It was a significant amount. It was 20,000 at that time. I reckon it's probably about $1 million or more than $1 million now. He gave to the Red Cross.
He had never forgotten his homeland, the French protectorate of Karikal. He contributed freely large sums of money towards education, health, and other public causes, and eventually he was honored with the highest accolade, the French equivalent of a knighthood.
In 1925, Moona Kader was awarded the Chevalier of the Legion of Honor by France. This is to appreciate the many contributions that he has made.
There's photographs of him shaking the hand of the consular in front of his big fish pond that he had there. And this gets international press coverage. It winds up showing up in French magazines. The illustration has this as this moment of a kind of French grandiosity that one of their own has been given this award all the way out in Southeast Asia.
My master ascended to a truly regal status. But behind this facade, a dark storm was brewing. I'm the crown jewel amongst my master's possessions. I've witnessed many lavish affairs within my walls, but none as grand and as extravagant as the wedding of my master's firstborn son, Yusuf. In traditional Indian Muslim culture, the firstborn son is generally seen as the successor who will carry forward the family name and values. My master spared no expense for this momentous event. This wasn't just a wedding, but a symbol of his triumph and legacy.
Thousands of people were invited. The newspaper coverage of it made a point of saying it was across a racial spectrum. So there were Europeans, Eurasians, and there were, native peoples of all kinds, as the newspaper put it.
Besides a beautiful bride to continue the family line, the wedding was also a rite of passage for Yusuf, who would be entrusted to take a greater role in family matters. It was also a symbolic event for my master, to hand over the reins of his vast business empire to Yusuf.
If I were to look at the wedding party that he held for his son, where there was some description, that was really a huge, huge party, for example, where he invited like 300-400 people of all nations that he knew, not just locals, but the Europeans and all. That he invited like 3,000 Muslims to come to the dinner, the wedding dinner.
While Yusuf was my master's blue-eyed son, I was the crown jewel of my master's pride, designed not just for beauty, but as a powerful tool to showcase his influence and build connections.
Kader Sultan must have been very proud of his elder son, because the elder son helped him in the business. He wants his son to be known also to all his other contacts. So this is one way of doing it.
Even with the last guest gone, the gaiety still echoed within me. It belied the future ahead. How could we have known that this celebration of beginnings would mark the end? It would cost my master dearly. While Yusuf managed the business side of things, my master operated behind the scenes, mingling with the powerful and well-connected.
What you're dealing with is somebody who can have parties where the Governor General is invited to them. So the top British official in the Straits settlements goes to his house for coffee.
My master's dealings with the British were an art form. He would charm them and then deftly maneuver his way into their trust. He was never outright defiant. Instead, he made himself indispensable, weaving himself into their plans until it was near impossible to do business without him.
That's the level of power that we're talking about. To put that into modern terms, it's like being able to pick up the phone and having the President of the Republic stop by your house for tea. This is a very powerful person at this point.
And during the First World War, I think 1916, when the British colonial masters were asking him to hold on to the prices and not increase it, he abided by that, and he was being applauded for maintaining the price at that time when he could easily increase the price.
Yet beneath my master's polished veneer of respectability, murmurs of shady dealings were beginning to spread. While he played the part of the respectable businessman, it was his son, Yusuf, who handled the darker deeds, working behind the scenes, brokering the hidden deals that his father's reputation could never openly endorse.
The Straits Cattle Trading Company was definitely the largest cattle trading company in Singapore. They had an almost near monopoly. And they had taken out, if you want to put it that way, businesses that had been around since the 19th century and had earlier businessmen who had dominated the field. And he was able to then kind of knock them all out of the way and take it over.
But behind the pomp and revelry, the bills were beginning to stack up. My construction and the grand celebrations had bled him dry. To maintain his profitability, he had to take more drastic actions.
They would have had to undercut people on pricing. They would have had to have better volume. It's just the way you'd undercut in any kind of business, yeah?
He was very good at pricing his meat, and he will even publish his prices, and he will try to be very competitive. I think that's one of the strategy to kind of minimize competition, to edge out competition by having quite low prices. But when there were less competition, he started to bring up his prices, and that's where he got into trouble with the Profiteering Commission.
My master hosted many government officials within my walls, especially those related to his businesses.
In 1920, the Commission of Profiteering investigates the Straits Cattle Trading Company. In 1922, he throws a big party for the Inspector General of Police as he's retiring to Britain. This is the same company we're talking about, and the same individual that ran that company. By this point, he was wealthy enough he could pay off cops, and he could use the cops to go after his rivals. You go from 1879, when he shows up on the docks, and he's a money changer, to this, not that long, really, within, 50 years. He becomes someone who has the ear of the Governor General of the Straits Settlements.
The close relationships my master cultivated with the British authorities would help him to smooth over troubles, even when complaints surfaced.
When the British noticed that prices were high, they had an investigation.
Officers from the Profiteering Commission scoured the markets, checking on prices and interviewing stallholders. They recorded complaints from stallholders who claimed my master monopolized the meat trade and raised prices unreasonably. My master, young Master Yusuf, and some employees from the Straits Cattle Trading were hauled up and interviewed by the Profiteering Commission, where he was given an opportunity to tell his side of the story.
The Profiteering Commission investigated and found that while he was making good profits for cattle, he was making very high profits for mutton.
The investigations were extended from 2 to 5 months. even as complaints poured in. And after an arduous half-year wait, my master was cleared of all wrongdoing. One crisis was averted, but more troubles awaited him. Competition from rival cattle traders have stiffened.
There was also competition then because some of the shareholders in Straits Cattle that left when Kader Sultan decided to be a sole proprietor, they started their own company. They started Malayan trading, Malayan cattle trading, they started Asiatic cattle trading, so a few other names that comes about, and they were competing with Kader Sultan.
Young master, acting on instructions by his father, fought back to control their turf.
The impression is that it was a very rough and tumble industry, that in order to make a success in that industry, you had to be willing to get your hands dirty, both literally and metaphorically. So how do you wind up making money on that kind of a product? You wind up becoming very cutthroat to do it. So you have to find ways of either bending the rules to make a little bit more money, or going after your rivals because they bent the rules and you've caught them and you can blackmail them or extort them or turn them into the police, etc.
My young master, not adapted to the threatening ways of the cutthroat industry, sought his father's advice. Little did he know that he was being manipulated by his very own kin as he wavered between being a filial son or a complicit to unlawful activity. With increasing demands from his father to wipe out the rivals, my young master pressured his workers to increase their threats on market vendors. However, their menacing deeds did not deter the rivals as they continued to undercut Straits Cattle Trading. But all this ended when a stronger contender emerged.
In 1933, a businessman by the name of M. Nathan came into the picture. I think his company was Malayan Livestock. He gave a lot of competition, very aggressive. He converted some of the existing butchers and retailers to his side, away from the Straits Cattle Trading. The butchers find that Straits Cattle Trading was getting more expensive, whereas Nathan's company was offering better deals. Fazal Shah was a bill collector and also a security personnel from Nathan.
Nathan would not back down. Nothing fazed him. He continued to do business his way, no matter the unmasked threats against him. Alas, he did not count on how far men would go when driven by greed and desperation. Weighed down by depleted riches and unscrupulous business rivalries, my master's world began to crack at its very core. And soon, all that was grand within me would ring hollow and false.
The scandals continued to plague Moona Kader Sultan right up until his dying day. And there was one final scandal that kind of brought him down socially in the 1930s. It was a man handling cattle at a stall at Kerbal Road for a rival company. And some employees of the Straits Cattle Trading Company were arrested for and charged with murdering this man.
The police alleged business rivalry in this violent murder case, and that my master was the one who delivered the final blow. Witnesses accused him of enticing the murderers with a job and money offer, an offer so great that they couldn't refuse. But was this really part of my master's plan? Or was there something more?
Karikal Mahal was such a palatial, resplendent environment for the magicians.
Between time of China and the Great Wall, there was this rivalry of who is better.
The 8th of December 1941 was that fateful day where reality changed for everyone.
I guess one would not expect that after a show, the next morning, early in the morning, there would be bombs dropping on Singapore. Of course, there were warning signs, but nobody actually believed. Everything we all can escape war.